This Framer crash course video will give you an introduction to using Framer and its fundamentals to build websites from scratch, even as a beginner. I'll take time to teach you exactly what you need to know in order to build web designs like these. We'll be creating this web design right here. This is a design for a template SaaS, and it's a pretty good looking website. We're not going to rebuild the entire thing, but I am going to show you all the main parts that you need to understand Framer. As part of this video though, you can download the entire template for free in my description below. And even if you get stuck at any point in time, you'll be able to reference that in order to figure out exactly what's going on. Here's a high-level overview of what we'll do in the video. First, we'll get started by logging into Framer and creating a brand new project with a blank canvas for our very first design. We'll take a look at the interface and the menus and where everything is, like the sidebars. Then we'll jump into building. We'll create some frames and stacks, and I'll teach you how auto layouts work. We'll move into typography, color, and styling, and then we'll have a look at how components and variations work. We'll definitely cover things like responsive design and breakpoints before moving on to things like creating sections for features and whatnot. Then we'll take a look at the CMS and creating dynamic content before finishing off with some fun stuff like animations and scroll effects, and then finally publishing the website so we can actually go live with it. Let's begin. All right, so the first thing we're going to take a look at is how to log into Framer. It's pretty simple. First, you want to head to Framer. It looks like this, but if you're not on this page, you can head to framer.com or just click the link in my description. From here, you can select the login or sign up buttons at the top right, but I'm just going to click the Get Started for Free button down here. You can log in with any email, but I'm going to sign in with Google since that's a lot faster. This will take you to the Workspace dashboard where you can see all your website projects. Right now, I've got quite a few, but if it's your first time signing in, you might not have any. Let's fix that. We'll want to select the main call to action here at the top right, which is a button called New Project. Framer will then give us the option to select a template to start our project from and then customize, or to start from a blank canvas. For this tutorial, we'll start with a blank canvas, but be aware we are replicating this modern SaaS template web design. So back here in picking a template, select the blank canvas project. And we're in. This is the official Framer interface. Let's take a closer look. On the left-hand side here, we have pages, layers, and assets. They're pretty self-explanatory, but I'll show you them in use later on. On the right side, we have an inspector panel. This is where all our positioning, sizing, styling, and customization happens. Here on the bottom, we have a floating menu, allowing you to select elements, drag the canvas, leave comments that don't actually interfere with the design itself, toggle the light and dark version of the interface itself, and a quick access panel, allowing you to quickly do things like publish or add different types of plugins. I don't use it that often. There's also the zoom section here where you can zoom in and out. Often I'm just dragging the scroll wheel while holding control to do this. And finally, an option here to upgrade the plan to a paid plan, allowing you to publish on your own domain. The final part of the interface, and probably the most important, is the top menu, where we can insert all sorts of things. From simple frames, rows, columns, to text and vectors and shapes, as well as even CMS, which is content management system for dynamic pages. We'll take a look at that a little bit later on as well. The main logo for Framer is also a drop-down file menu that looks very traditional to what you see in Windows and Mac, where you have things like file, edit, export, undo, redo, as well as modifying elements that you're currently selecting. But the main thing you'll want to know about is the site settings. This is where you'll establish the settings for the project site itself and can include things like the main site title, its description, its favorite icon or social preview, and even setting the domain. But we'll get into this a little bit later on. It's just for you to know it's there. Final part of the interface is the top right, where we can add collaborators to our project. We can view its localization, its site settings, analytics, and even preview how it should look like in a browser. Finally, when we're ready, we can select publish, and this will put it straight onto an online domain. But if you don't have one yet, you can also preview it in a Framer subdomain. So we have this design canvas with nothing in it. Framer works with frames, and it works with sections and auto layouts. Let's have a look at exactly how they work now. If you head to the top menu of Framer, you'll see the option here to add a frame. I'm going to do so and just using my mouse cursor here to create one. If you hold shift, it creates a perfect square. But let's resize it to this rectangle shape. On the left sidebar, if you head to layers, you'll be able to see it just over here, nested under desktop. As the name suggests, frames are essential to Framer, and they're essentially divs if you come from a programming background. We can nest them inside of other frames, allowing us to drag them almost almost like a group. Alternatively, you can pull them right outside of the desktop canvas, and this will make them actually appear outside of that nesting structure just over here. Right now, the position of these frames are absolute, which means we can drag them anywhere we want. However, by selecting the plus sign next to layout, we change this to a stack. It works a little bit different. Firstly, the frame inside is locked into position. Its alignment is based on the settings of its parent, which is just over here. This section here gives you a lot more control, and this frame, which is now a stack, can be aligned from the top, middle, or bottom for its children. You can also change the distribution from start, center, or end, which is the position from the left and right hand side. You can also change its direction and whether it's a stack or a grid. Here, for example, in grid, I can change how many columns and rows the grid items are, and then any children inside of them will adhere to that grid structure. The main thing I want you to take away from this is that you have frames, which can convert into stacks or grids, and then you can customize how their children are laid out. Like here, for example, I've added 30 pixels of padding around the edges of the stack. From here, I can copy paste a couple of those frames and they appear in the stack, as you can see. That should introduce you to frames and stacks. So let's have a look at some of the pre-configured ones we can use under the layout tool. First, let's look at rows. They're essentially stacks that work vertically. Here, I'll add one quickly in, and it starts with 2 children, as you can see here. It's pre-configured to work, so now if you want to add more children to it, we can select one of these frames and simply copy paste it out, and you can see it adheres to that row structure. You can customize these rows by adding more gap between each one of the children elements, but let's move on to the next one. Next up, we have columns. These are essentially just like rows, except instead of being shown vertically, they're shown horizontally for their children elements. Here's an example of a couple of those columns with some children inside, and to be honest, 90% of the web designs I do are just made up of these stacks of columns or rows. However, there are 2 more that are worth knowing, which are grids, allowing you to create a combination of rows and columns, as well as a masonry, which is kind of like a grid, but it just doesn't have a strict guideline. I mainly use it for things like bento grids or for an image gallery. Now to add text, we're going to take a look at typography, color, and styling, because these are pretty easy to implement, and we're going to start customizing them inside of the design. Before we move on to text, let's get rid of all these previous layouts we created and zoom back into our canvas. For the text, we're going to select the text option here from the top menu. Now, anywhere on the frame or inside of the design canvas, we can click and start writing out text. I'll write example text section. Here, there's a circle at the bottom, and if we select it, we can actually make the text larger or smaller. And if we just click on the box itself, we can drag the text around or even copy paste additional versions of it. There's another way to use text. If you select it and define a box like this, then you can write text in there, and this will adhere to the box width, which means that any text beyond that will break the line. You can see this a bit more clearly when I expand or reduce the size of the box width itself, and you can do this through the little circle or just on the sidebar. Now let's take a look at how to customize text. On the right hand side, we have this text section in the inspector that allows us to define different types of parameters, like the size. I can change it to 24 pixels or 18 pixels. I can also click up and down to reduce it. There's also a little trick that if you head to this section near the arrows and click and hold, then you can move the mouse up and down, and the values change with respect to how far you're moving your mouse up and down. Additionally, we can change the size to be based on rem units or even just to fit the container it's within. So this is just using the full width of that box. But normally I like to keep it on 24 pixels because a pixel format allows us to control a little bit more of the sizing itself. Now that we have these 2 sections, let's relabel them so that they make a little bit more sense. I'll call the top one with the larger text a header title and the bottom one a description title or paragraph title. Let's take a look at some of the additional settings we have here inside of text. On the right hand panel, we have options for font, weight, color, lettering, lining. If you select any of these, like the color one here, you can actually go through and select the exact color you want, or even put in the hex value itself. You can also change its opacity so that it's a little bit more transparent on whatever background it is. Let's have a look at some of the other ones. We also have lettering, which is the space between letters, as well as the line height, and even the alignment, whether items are aligned in the middle, on the left, or on the right hand side. But most of these I usually keep standard based on the font I'm using. And of course, there's a lot of font options. You start off with the font Inter since it's the most readable, but there's lots of fonts in here and I'm pretty sure you can even import your own if you want something custom. There are other things you can change like the weight of the text, whether it's bold, semi-bold, italics. And now you know mostly everything you need to know about text inside of Framer. But we want to, for example, sometimes group bits of text together. We can do this by selecting them, right-clicking and adding them to a frame or a stack. You can see the layout of them has changed, and that's simply because the stack is overriding their position. So let's change this stack by moving it here to the left-hand side, changing its alignment to the left, as well as making sure that its children inside, the text elements themselves, are using the full width. You're not going to actually manually expand these out, but you're going to select them. Head to the width section over here and make sure they're set to fill. And this makes sure that they fill up the entire amount of width of its parent stack or frame. On the left-hand panel, if we head to layers, we can see that stack just over here. When we resize it now, since it is filling up the full width, you can see that it's breaking the line properly, and we can move this anywhere into position on our website based on where we need it. Quick pause. If you struggle with web design, check out the course I created over 2 years called Teach Me Design. It tells you how to pick good colors, good fonts, and how to combine everything together to create a good looking website. It's a book as well as video guide that has over 300 pages and resources of exactly how to create good looking sites like the one we're building right now inside of Framer. Now for components. Components are things like sections or buttons and things that we also can create variations for. They're pretty important when you're creating stuff on Framer, so you can create reusable content. Let's create that now. We'll create a button for our first component. Head over here to the top and select frame, and let's create a small little rectangle down here in the shape of a button, just like this. You can see that its height is about 50 pixels and width is around 200 pixels. If you double click on it, you can add some text in here. I'm just going to call it button component. Since we've added text into it, it's converted itself from a frame to a stack, and it's aligned everything into the center. From here, you want to select the parent stack or frame, right click on it and select create component. This will turn it into a component after we give it a label. For my label, I'm just going to call it button default. This takes us to the component screen. And in case you get lost, at the top here, you have a breadcrumb, so you can always go back to the home page. But if you want to view the component, then you can go to the sidebar on layers to see it, or you can simply double click on it to go back to the component view. So what can we do with components? Well, we can customize how they look. When you hover, when you press, let's select this plus sign here on hover, and this allows us to create a variation of what the button should look and act like on a mouse hover. We can also do one for when you click or press with the mouse. Let's do some customization. On variation 1, let's change the background of the button to be black. You can see that all our buttons are black now because it's pulled from the parent. If we head to the text and make it white, you can see now all our buttons have been updated. Let's now change the hover state. If we change the background to that to be gray and for the pressed version to be white, only those respective versions change because they're meant to be a variation from the base state. With that done, we've now got 3 variations for our button. Let's actually test if this works. If we head back to the home page, you can see our button component is now black and white. If we select the play button and hover over it or click, we can see how those states change. Now, this is the basics of creating a component. It's a reusable asset now that we can use anywhere in our design. Now, I can copy, paste, and use this button anywhere in our design. We have 2 of them, for example, but they're exactly the same. And this is where we need to start looking at variables and variations. Firstly, variables allow you to customize how the button functions. If you have a look on the right-hand inspector, you'll see these plus signs next to different attributes. All of these can be customized as variables. Let's select the text and customize the content to start off with. Right now, the content is a button component. If we change it to button, it's going to relabel all our buttons with the text button, which isn't very useful. Instead, if we select the text and select the content and select the little plus sign next to it, it changes it into a variable. We can change the variable to be plain text or formatted text. For the time being, I'll just do plain text and call this button label. We can have this as an optional field that can be adjusted later on in the design. And now if we head back to our home screen and select our second button, on the right-hand side inspector, we can see that a new button value is available for us to enter. Here, I'm going to call it Hello World, and this changes the button content to say Hello World instead of the text button. If we remove that, it'll just go back to the default button text. Pretty cool. We've created our first variation, and it's just for text. But we can do that for all sorts of things, whether it's the background color. Here we can change it from simply being black to a variable. If we go back to the home page and select our second button here, we can now change the background to be something like red or blue, and it doesn't affect all of our buttons, just this one button, since it's a value that we're changing for it specifically for its background fill. Now let's create another button, because this time we're going to take a look at variations for components. Let's double click on it, and over here there's a plus sign. This creates a variant of the first component. Variations mean that we're adjusting some of the parameters to work a little bit different from the default state. In this variation, I might want to have a larger button. So I'll increase the font size to something like 24 pixels, and I could do other variations too, but we'll keep it simple for now. I'll also label this a large button. If you view it now, you can see that it's slightly different, but we can do more customization on it as well. For this one, for example, instead of having a fixed size, maybe I want the size to fit the content that's inside, which is the text. In this condition, I might want to add some padding. So rather than 20 padding all around, what I'll do is add maybe something like 40 padding from the left and right hand sides. And then from the top and bottom, I might change that to be around 15 pixels. And that way it still looks like a button, but now it's based on the text content itself. If we go back to the home page now and select this button, down here we have a new option here for variant. I can select large button, and it's changed that to be the variant with the larger text. You can see that the sizing hasn't updated because the parent container is currently being set manually. So let's actually update that here at the top right, changing the width to be fit content, and that'll make this a large variant button utilize the padding we just created. This means that if we want to change the content of the text inside, we can just simply go back down here to button label and start filling it out with something like the large button. You'll see that the text, the styling, and the sizing of the button updates accordingly. Pretty cool. And this also doesn't affect the previous buttons, since this variation works in its own system. This will mean that we have to redo our states here for hover and click, but we can quickly do that copying over the same settings that we previously had. Testing our new component variation, you can see now it works as a large button. Pretty cool and pretty simple. So we now understand how components work in an individual state. But did you know that you can have multiple components working together even in a nested group? So right now we have this stack we have for the header title. We can actually change this to its own component. Then we can actually grab one of the buttons, put them into a stack or a frame, and we can turn that into a component as well. So now we have components inside components inside components. This is what makes Framer pretty special when it comes to components. We can create this section here called Hero 1, which is made up of a button and hero text, which is also made up of a header text or a button component. Each one of these can be customized and viewed inside, and if we make changes to one, it'll apply to everything. Furthermore, we can pass down properties as variables to each one. Let's create a variable here for the title, header text, and the description. These are both plain text variables. Up a level, we can customize these by selecting that variable and putting them in. However, here on the home page, you see those variables aren't accessible. This is because this parent component actually doesn't have any properties or values to pass down. They're technically fixed and already set inside of the hero component. So let's actually make them a variable that we can set in the level above. Here, I'll create them as a text value, and now they're going to be passed down straight from the home page. In here, we can define these, and this is how people create reusable sections like Hero 1, Hero 2 that are made up of components like header text or buttons and can be customized easily on the sidebar. This should be enough to get you started on components, but if you do have any questions, let me know in the comments below. We are now at a point where we can start replicating this design I showed you at the start of the video, using a combination of frames, stacks, text, and customization. So let's begin doing that now. We're here with a blank page, and I'm going to show you a new part of Framer, this plus sign to quickly add pre-made content to Framer's design. This can include entire sections like hero sections, navigation, as well as other elements like buttons or even embedded links. There's quite a few here, so definitely check that out. But right now, we're going to add in a pre-made navigation section. It's going to come in as a component with some pre-configured menu items, and we can start customizing this to replicate duplicate the design we have on the right hand side. Right now it's all white, and you can see our design here on the right side is black. So let's select the topmost element and change its fill from white to black. When we do this, we'll need to also update all the links, which are a light gray right now, to also be a white color so that they can stand out in contrast to this new background that we've selected. We'll do the same here for the logo, making this SVG shape now a white color. Great, so we've updated this, but we don't use an exact black. We can actually use the color picker tool here to pick this off gray, which is close to black, so we have the exact same color that we have in our design file. There are a couple of other things to modify, such as a small border radius around the sides of the menu, as well as the fact that the menu feels like it's floating at the top. We can do this by adding in a parent frame or stack. I'll add a parent stack here and set a max width of 720 pixels, and I'll also give it some padding around the sides so that it has some buffer from the very top of the window, and this will give it that floating look that we currently have in the design. With that done, we've almost finished with our menu design. There's only one more change, which is adding a button to the very top right. There is this button located at the top right that says Getting Started. So what I can do here is pull in our button component we created earlier. I can't just paste this into the nav bar. I will need to double click on the nav to get into the component itself and then paste it in here. After this, we'll need to style and customize that a little bit. Rather than the fill being black, let's change it to the orange color we have in the design. We can do the color picker here to make sure that it's the exact same color. Additionally, the button is a little bit too large, so we can resize that so it's about the same size as it is in the design. I'll update the label here so the button doesn't just say that as text, but actually says Getting Started, the same as in the design. And once we do that, we will need to customize the sizing just a little bit so that it is around 18 pixels in terms of sizing. It is something that maybe you want to do as a custom variable, but I'm just quickly doing this on the fly. Finally, we want to make sure that the alignment of the button is on the far right. This is where we can click on the parent stack and change the distribution of items here to space between, which pushes it to the far right edge. With that done, we do need to make sure that there is some padding on the right hand side, because right now it might have 0 padding and it's hitting the edge. So just make sure you have these default values set. With all that done, we now have a menu here for our web design that looks very reminiscent of the one in our design file. Let me show you another way you can create components and styles inside of Framer. What you can do is actually head over to pre-made components or assets like this template page here, which can be found as a free asset, and actually go into that Figma file itself, select the item you want, hit Ctrl+C or right click and copy the element, then head back to your own workspace or website and paste that straight into the section you want. This actually copies over that component and its styling so that it is exact based on where you copied it from. It's a way of actually being able to have reusable assets or even pull in assets from different parts of other websites that are free that you might draw inspiration from. And it's a great way to improve your workflow. We already know now how to create components, and while you could do this over a period of 10 to 20 minutes, this is how you can save some time for yourself. What I'm going to do now is style the stack, which is the parent for this tag right here. I want to start to create this as a hero section that looks the same as our design on the right side. So what I'm going to do is give it a stack that aligns everything from top to bottom and has around 50 pixels from the top and the bottom as padding. Here, if we go back to the design, let's copy out some of these elements like the text. What I'll do is grab a new text element and paste it here into the stack. Right now, you can see that the alignment isn't properly configured. It's going left to right, so make sure that that is up to down. You might also notice that this hero text title actually goes across 2 lines rather than just being across 1 line. We can do this by decreasing the size of its block to around 480 pixels, and we can also customize its parent to utilize fill content so it doesn't overflow. It just adheres to the sizing of the content inside. With that done, we now have this design that's looking very close to what we had earlier. Let me copy paste one more text block for the description underneath the hero text, and let me remove the styling that we have for the header one and actually apply my own styling here for a paragraph. So here I'll just close this off in styling, reduce the font size to something like 18 pixels, and remove the font weight so that it's maybe something like regular. You'll notice even the text color itself isn't exactly black, it's a gray. So I'm going to do the opacity here around 60 to 80%. What I'm doing now is just some micro adjustments to things like each one of these paragraphs, exactly where the line break happens. So in this case, I'm going to reduce the width here of this section just a little bit more, so the line break happens exactly at the word pulled. Now we just need one more button at the very bottom called Get Started. And to do this, I'm going to copy out our earlier Get Start button, paste it here in below, and change its color from orange back to a black color. Specifically this dark gray black that we're using in the design. And now we've almost copied out the design perfectly. You'll notice this stack here could actually do with a little bit more padding between each element. This is where I can expand it out just a little bit more to around 20 pixels, creating this design that is almost one-to-one from our design on the right-hand side. There are still a few elements we could customize, such as the background color, or for example, how the responsive design looks, but we're gonna jump into that very soon in the next part of the video. All right, we've finally got a web design, but it only works on the desktop. When we shrink it down to things like the tablet or mobile viewport, we might have some issues. So let's take a look at how to create a responsive design inside of Framer, and then how to customize each design depending on the viewport you're viewing it in. Since we're going to look at responsive design, let me just maximize this window over here. And we're going to take a look at this tab at the very top right here next to our website called Breakpoints. We can create one here for a tablet and one more here for a phone. You'll notice that each one of these look exactly the same. It's because we haven't customized them yet. There are some things I need to clarify. If I select any item on the desktop view and delete it, it's going to delete from all the breakpoints. However, if I do it on the tablet or phone version, it's not actually deleting the item itself. It's more hiding it, so it's not visible to the viewport. Another example is if I move an element. It's going to move in all examples. It is possible to reorder elements on the tablet and phone versions, but be aware that often you'll need to create an element across all versions and simply hide or show it depending on how you need it to operate. With that in mind, let's have a look at the phone version here, where the hero text is overflowing. We can resize this block here so that it can fit in place. But this is a very specific measurement to the width of this container. We can do the same in tablet, but they're not going to come and carry across. You need to define it for each viewport. Right now, a static width isn't the best way. So let's actually change this to fill the content of its width. It's a much better way to create this styling for the text itself, but it is worthwhile having a little bit of padding for the text from the left-hand side. So here on the stack itself, I'm going to add around 20 pixels of padding on the left and the right side. So that way the text itself will always have some breathing room, even if the phone is extra small or a little bit larger like an iPhone Max. Next, let's fix the menu. Here you can see that the menu is a little bit off center, and that's because I added padding to the main desktop version. Here on the phone version, I'm going to get rid of that padding so that our logo and hamburger menu aren't sitting misaligned to their current position like they are. So here in padding, I'll set that to 0, and you can see that it works just fine now and doesn't apply to the desktop size. So here now you can see that looks a lot better, and our desktop frame looks great. So if we select play, we can actually preview this desktop frame. I've just noticed one more issue. The text is still black because we haven't adjusted it inside of our menu component. So let's jump back into there, select the links, and make sure that the text on this is actually white as well. I'm going to do that just over here. I think I'll also remove the Getting Started button, since that's only for the desktop view. So here I can right click and select hide, and it's not going to show up on the mobile viewport. Heading back here, let's test this all works. Select the drop down, and there is our menu, and the text is properly white. One thing to note about creating breakpoints and responsive design is that you can hide different elements on lower viewports without affecting the desktop view. So here, if I select any one of these elements and select to hide them, they simply aren't viewable on that viewport itself. It doesn't mean that they're disappeared, they're still on the sidebar. You can always re-enable them to be visible or hit Ctrl-Z to undo that change, but it does allow you to have additional flexibility when trying to get everything to work on a certain viewport. One useful tidbit is that if you ever do use pre-made components or even from the quick add section, then all of these already have breakpoints and responsive designs cooked in, which means that you don't have to really do anything besides customizing the content itself, because it's going to work on any viewport. And I find this pretty useful whenever I'm creating designs. If you have custom data, you need a content management system. So for this next part, we're going to take a look at the CMS inside of Framer and how it all works. So up here, we have this button for CMS or Content Management System. It's currently blank, so let's add a sample one in, which creates a blog style CMS. It comes with a collection for articles, a collection for categories, and they're also connected together. If you click in, you can view more information about this CMS, and its content includes things like the title, the URL, an image, and a description. If we head back to the main page, you can see a blog collection page has been created where we can navigate through these. But let's actually go to the home page and see how we can start using collections inside of our designs. If you head to the top left menu, there is a CMS option here for collections where we can drag in articles. They pop up just like this, and you can see that they already are defined with the first 5 that were auto-generated. You can of course add your own, but we'll use these as a test example. The benefit of CMSs is dynamic data, allowing us to change data here in the design and it updates in the database, as well as updating the database and then having an update in the design. This flexibility is perfect for things like blogs or articles or content that is likely to need to be updated more regularly than a fixed web page design. When we drag and drop a CMS into the frame, the design is pretty set. It's just a basic title as well as a small icon for the image and not much else. But we can customize things like the container and its gap between each item. We can even copy out elements like this title here. If I copy and paste it, we'll create 2 versions for each one of the collection items, and we can link it to a different variable from that collection. As an example, I've copied the title and changed its variable to showcase the date instead. Alternatively, instead of the date, we can get it to showcase the slug, kind of like the URL that you would need to access the page, useful if you're creating a link, or even just the content of the page itself, though this might be a little bit large and not fit on our current design. But it just gives you an idea that you can present any bit of information on collections on your page itself. Let's get rid of all of that and create our own design for our collection. The normal way I like to do this is define how it should look before adding the collection in. So here I'm going to create a basic frame. It's going to include a description as well as an image. And I'm going to make sure that the layout for this is an actual stack so that its alignment looks nice and clean when we utilize it. Here you can see I've added in the image and the text block. I'm just going to update the positioning of these stacks so that they're filling out the content rather than having a strict fixed height and width. Now that I have this in place, I can head back to the insert, drag in the CMS entries, and what I'll do is delete the pre-made layout that was generated and use my own. I'll do this by dragging the stack into the articles collection. You can see that it's replicated one for each one of the collection items. There's no data yet, so I'll have to link that up. Here in content, I'll link up the title, and here for the image, I'll go to the fill, which is the image itself, and select to utilize the variable here from the image of the CMS. And just like that, we have now a custom design for our collection inside of our homepage. Pretty nifty. This design can be further customized now. We can head to the main parent here and change this design from a stack to a grid and change its height and width to fill based on the content inside. And now we have these a nice array or grid list of items here. This looks pretty good. We can further customize this section to make sure it fills out on all the viewports. So let me actually just update the tablet version over here, as well as the mobile version on the far right, so that it doesn't feel like it's being clipped a little bit too early. Additionally, for the mobile viewport, we want to consider a responsive design. So rather than making it 2 columns, I'm just going to make it a single column. Right now, showcasing 5 items feels like it doesn't really look great for the design. So what I can do is click on the articles here on the desktop version and limit it to 4, which looks a lot better. For the tablet view, I could limit this to 2, which looks a little bit better. And then for the mobile view, I can limit it to 3. That way we've got a little bit more of a dynamic responsive design happening, which is unique to every viewport. There's a lot you can do through CMS and collections, such as view the actual entries in the dynamic page that is created, and you can also customize this page so it adheres to your design. Like we could go back here to the main homepage, copy out the navbar that we created as a reusable component and paste this straight into the blog page, and even paste this into the blog article page. This way, whenever we make any changes to that navbar, it automatically gets updated on these additional pages for the CMS since it's a reusable component. Now for the fun part, we're going to take a look at different types of effects and animations we can add to the content we already have, as well as how to add new stuff. Here on our page, we can select an item, and on the right hand side, we have this option here for effects. If we click plus, we can create an appear effect, making this text element fade in on the page when we enter the page. So let's test this out. You might not have noticed that, it's pretty quick. So I'm going to select on the spring transition to change it from 0.4 seconds to 4 seconds. Hopefully now when we select play, you can see that slowly transitioning in. Looks much better. Let me show you some of the effects we can create. Let's click on this tag over here and create a drag effect. This allows users to select the item and drag it around. It'll snap back into position once they let go of the cursor, but it just allows for a little bit of interaction on your page. Another effect you can apply is to the articles themselves, allowing them to fade into view only once we have them in the viewport. So to do this, I'm going to select appear. I'm going to select a layer is in view, and then I'm going to have them fade in. Now this is a pretty cool thing that allows us to make it feel like our page is loading in as we're scrolling through. Let me duplicate the article section over here so we actually have enough room to scroll through and preview it. This is what I mean by them fading in once we scroll to the element itself. There are a lot of animations and effects you can apply. One of the most default ones is usually on a button where you create a hover effect that increases its scale by maybe 10% when you're hovered over it. It's a pretty easy win if you want buttons to feel dynamic. So definitely test around the effects and animations you can apply. I'd recommend playing around with all the types of effects you have, from scroll, drag, loop, press, appear, hover. There's even page transitions you can do if you select the entire desktop frame itself, allowing you to decide what a transition looks like from one page to another. In this case, I'm going to set up a little crossfade to new pages. And you can see what this looks like in action when I click get started, and we have this fade in to the blog section. Now I'm going to show you something really cool. So far, we've got a single design we've worked at and customized a little bit, but maybe you're looking for a different design altogether. This is where the Framer marketplace actually has tons of different types of designs, components, plugins, and much more that you can utilize in your own website. This allows you to browse through and pick one, and most of them are free, but then even the paid ones look pretty damn good. So definitely check that out if you have a chance. But here are some examples. If you're on the Framer page, head to Resources and to Marketplace. Here you have your plugins, templates, components, etc. Under templates, you have hundreds of different categories, from landing pages to education to personal portfolio type website designs. Then under plugins, you can integrate different types of apps and services, from e-commerce to utilities like Notion or Lottie for animation with SVGs. So really up to you depending on what you need. And then under components, you have pre-made assets which you can literally copy paste straight into your design to start taking advantage of them. Like for example, here's a typewriter effect. I can click on this pre-made component, select copy, and then head back to our design that we had earlier and paste this right into the hero section. From here on the right hand side inspector, I'll just change the words to be the same as our main text. And just like that, we've integrated a typewriter animation into our title. Here's another example. Here on the marketplace, I'm gonna search up the word assertion, and this will lead us straight to the template we've been creating today. From here, you can select to preview or use this template, which will lead you straight to the completed version of this web design right here. This page now can be modified, or you can actually grab any element like this section over here and copy paste it straight into the design we're working on. And the design comes with all the fonts, settings, responsive design, and elements that you need in order to customize it for your own needs. I think this is the way to go if you're going to create a design, and it's definitely going to save you a lot of time, since everything, even the responsive design, is already made. All right, we're here at the final part. We're going to publish the website, and this is actually one of the easiest parts of them all. Here at the top right of the Framer website, you have a button called Publish. If you select it, you can publish your website online. Since I've already published mine says Update, and that's it. If we click the link over here, we can see the full version of the page. Publishing your website is probably the easiest part of the whole process, but there are a few things to know. Right now, we are not on a free domain. We're on a subdomain of Framer. You can customize the subdomain name, or you can even connect it to an existing domain or claim a new one, but just be aware you will need to upgrade to a paid plan to do this. So this is the basic stuff for Framer. Are you ready for the more advanced stuff? If you are, let me know in the comments below, because this is all I can do for one video. But also a big thanks to Framer for sponsoring it and making videos like this and others happen on this channel. If you want to learn more about it, definitely check out the link in the description below. Otherwise, I'll see you in the next one. Thank you.